This is Twit.
Well, the U.S. government doesn't want technology companies telling users about government data requests. Major companies like Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, Twitter, Yahoo, and Google used to comply with these requests, but increasingly they're changing their tune, or they're in the process of changing their tunes and their policies as well to inform users, directly flouting government requests, according to a report in the Washington Post by Craig Timberg, who's with us here today to explain the trend. Welcome, Craig.
Thanks for having me.
Well, now, Craig, what kind of data are the government requesting, and what do they request? How do they request it? How does this process work, and why do they do it?
So police, prosecutors, civil agencies come with subpoenas all the time for data that can help them with their investigations. And if they want, for example, the contents of your email or what you've posted to Facebook, they actually need a search warrant, which is a pretty high standard. You need probable cause. But there's this whole other quite broad universe of data that's metadata: who you correspond with, what sort of phone numbers you put in with the user accounts, what IP addresses you use to log onto their services. And that historically has been gettable using a mere subpoena, which is not that hard to get. And but increasingly the companies are pushing back. They're saying, if you want this data, first of all, we're going to tell our users. And second of all, if it's at all possible, we're going to try to push for a search warrant, which is a higher standard.
Now, subpoena sounds like a pretty serious thing, and these requests are stamped right on the outside of the subpoena, right? How binding are they? Are they just simply requests, or are they legally binding in any way?
Depends what kind of subpoena they are. The FBI can issue something called a national security letter, and it has to do only with certain very high-level investigations. And those things are binding. They can be challenged in court, but never been done so successfully. But there's a whole very broad universe of subpoenas, tens of thousands of which go out to tech companies every year, and they on the front say, please don't tell your users that we're asking for their data. Tech companies used to abide by that, as telephone companies do, always have and still do. But the tech companies have really stopped playing ball with this, and increasingly are pushing back and saying, at the very minimum, we're going to tell our users before we turn over their data. That gives the users a chance to get a lawyer and go to court and try to stop it.
Now, what does telling users mean? Are they posting all of them somewhere publicly, or are they just going right after the individual user who's the subject of the subpoena?
No, they go right to the user. They'll send them an email and say, we've gotten such and such a query from such and such an agency. You have a certain amount of time to try to contest this. And then the tech companies don't want to be in the middle of it at that point, right? They're not going to get a lawyer to try to resist this. They don't want to let you know, and they're going to give you the chance to fight it in court if you want to. At the very least, though, you know that somebody important is looking at your data.
I mean, is this ethical? I mean, if they're going after a terrorist and a drug kingpin and a violent murder or whatever, and they issue the subpoena for the data, is it ethical for a tech company to sort of inform them and essentially warn them that they're being investigated?
So the companies will give you two answers to that question. The first is that if it's a serious matter, if notification is really going to screw up an investigation, you can always go to a judge and get that subpoena gag ordered. You can get a search warrant, which is routinely gag ordered. So it's not as though in every case users are being notified, but they're trying to force authorities to come with a higher level of proof before they block this sort of routine notification. The second answer they'll give is all of these policies have carve-outs for special exceptions. If there's a child in grave danger, if there's a terrorist attack that is imminent, the companies absolutely will turn over that data to the authorities very quickly. But they want to have the leverage to make those sorts of situations be the exception rather than the rule.
Robert Scoble, does that freak you out? Because, I mean, here we have tech companies deciding whether subpoenas or crimes or cases that are being investigated are worth, they're being the judge and jury essentially by deciding themselves whether to warn or not warn the target of these investigations.
I think they want a little bit more information about what's being turned over. These blanket orders are sort of not good for the tech industry. They don't engender trust with our customers. So I like it from that aspect. I just spoke to the surveillance community, about 4,500 people, and met with several of them. And I think most of the industry is well-meaning, and that industry is well-meaning and is actually trying to protect us. But God, it's a real hard thing to decide between, or to moderate between both sides. Because if I'm a spy and I want to spy on things, I don't want to tell you why I'm spying on you. I don't want you to be warned that you're being spied on, because you're going to change your behavior, right? And already that was some of the people talking to me off the record said, we already know that the terrorists have changed their behavior because of Edward Snowden, and so it's making their jobs a lot tougher, which probably is fair game.
Absolutely, and I think Edward Snowden has changed a lot of things, and one of them is probably, I would probably guess that Edward Snowden revelations have changed the public mood about government requests for data, and that's probably why these technology companies are revealing the data, precisely because the public mood has changed because of the Edward Snowden revelations.
Yeah.
Craig Timberg, do you think that's accurate?
There's no question that's true. Now, some of this goes back a couple of years as tech companies began to be a little more assertive, but the Snowden revelations were just a huge bomb in this industry, and they're fighting for customers all over the world. And if Google and Facebook and Apple are seen as sort of an arm of the government's investigative facilities, that's very bad for their businesses. So they're looking for ways to distance themselves a bit. This somewhat cozier relationship really grows out of the telecommunications industry. So the big phone companies always have complied pretty readily with police requests of all sorts. And the tech companies did that at first, but once this became huge front-page news in the Washington Post and elsewhere, the tech companies decided it was time to really do this differently, to really be more transparent with users, to guard their privacy more carefully, and to create more of an arm's length relationships with the government.
Well, Craig Timberg, I want to thank you for coming on Tech News today. It was a great story, and I really appreciate you coming on and telling us more about it.
Thanks. It's been my pleasure.
All right. You can find Craig Timberg, at thewashingtonpost.com, and also on Twitter at Craig Timberg.